I am Scott Locker with the Family Farms Group out of Brighton, Illinois. With the planting of the 2020 crop nearly complete now, it's now time to turn our attention to preserving the maximum yield potential of the crops you have planted. One major component of preserving yield potential is the use of foliar fungicides and other foliar applied products to help maintain plant health. With me today to answer your questions on this topic is Tim Sickman. Tim serves in a dual capacity with Loveland Technical Services, which is the product development and technical support arm of Loveland Products, Inc. He is both manager of the Loveland Research Farm in Owensboro, Kentucky, and a technical development agronomist for Nutrien Ag Solutions Eastern Regions. Sickman's primary role at the 92-acre Owensboro farm entails overseeing applied research projects, most of which focus on testing experimental materials from Loveland's developmental pipeline on corn, soybeans, wheat, and other certain specialty crops. He and his staff of 3 full-time research agronomists annually conduct over 100 small plot, replicated studies encompassing crop protection products, plant nutritionals and fertilizers, adjuvants, seed treatments, plant growth regulators, abiotic stress relief agents, various agronomic cultural practices, and much more. As technical development agronomist, Sickman provides field training and support to Loveland's arm of proprietary product managers, who they refer to as PPMs, based within his territory. He also coordinates with the PPMs to conduct large-scale on-farm trials and demonstrations with many of the Loveland's newer commercial product offerings. If you could, join me in welcoming Tim, and let's get to some of the questions. Good morning, Tim.
Good morning, Scott. With you.
Don't mind me to start off with, why should I, as a farmer, invest in a plant health fungicide application with the challenging commodity markets that we are dealing with this year, especially with the COVID-19 and how the whole economy is at this point?
Well, that's a very good question, and economics is, at the end of the day, what it's all about. But growers need to take into consideration what they've invested in the crop so far. They've obviously put a lot of money into seed, into fertilizer, into weed control programs, and they have set the template for what they hope will be a good yielding, high performing crop. And at this point, as we go toward the middle of the season, it's about preserving that yield potential that all of those other investments have been directed toward. And plant disease and other stress factors like dry weather, shortages of water and so forth can certainly subtract significantly from that potential if we don't take action to safeguard against that. And fungicides offer a very important line of protection to preserve yield potential by keeping plants in a greener, healthier state, keeping them photosynthetically active at a higher plane of performance and keeping them photosynthetically active longer, so that the leaves of a corn or soybean plant can move more sugars and carbohydrates and other things like proteins and so forth into the developing seed to drive what they hope will be an outstanding yield at the end of the day. And so we're simply utilizing fungicides as a timely, effective means to protect the rest of the investment, if you will.
Okay, sounds good. So, a fungicide is much more than just protecting the crop against diseases. It does much more, like what you were saying then.
Oh yeah, there are a lot of indirect effects from fungicides. If we do a good job of throttling and curbing disease, and we keep the leaves green, and we minimize the presence of brown lesions and blighted spots and so forth, that means that the plant's going to derive most of its sugars and carbohydrates from the leaves. And if you think about a corn plant in particular, what that means is we're going to maintain a good health in the pith of the stalk. A plant that's highly diseased or facing heavy pressure from gray leaf spot or northern leaf blight, for example, if it can't get what it needs from the leaves, it'll cannibalize the stalk for those nutrients and so forth, and that weakens the pith, and that can lead to standability and lodging problems as harvest time approaches. So one of the great indirect benefits of fungicides is not just the foliar protection against fungal pathogens, but indirectly better stalk and plant strength for better standability, and that gives you more opportunity to buys you more time to keep that crop upright and to get the combine to it and to be able to harvest in an efficient manner and not be facing issues of trying to pick up a down crop.
Sounds great. Sounds great there. There are a lot of different fungicides out there on the market, as you know, as well as I do, but can you take a minute and talk about maybe the different modes of actions? I'm sure they're not all the same from jug to jug that farmers can get.
That's right, Scott. And when we talk corn and soybean fungicides today, there are really three primary modes of action or family groupings of fungicides, if you will. And one that perhaps has been around the longest of those is what we just generally refer to as the triazole fungicides. They're from a particular group and they're primarily curative in nature. What they do is they disrupt the cellular membrane in fungal pathogens. Fungal pathogens are a lot like a lot of other living entities. They have cellular structure and they respire. They take in oxygen and they give off CO2, and the triazoles will disrupt those cellular membranes and lead to the collapse of cell walls in those pathogens, and that's how they go about killing them. And also, it's for that reason that we primarily think of the triazoles as curative in nature. When applied in a timely fashion, they can actually stop an early stage infection and shut it down by killing some of the structures of that fungus. So that's the triazoles, and the triazoles include some products that have been around a long time, and yet there are new triazoles being introduced to the market even today, and we'll talk about that maybe a bit more in a second. Another key grouping of fungicides that has been around just a little less long than the triazoles is what we call the Strobiliarans. The Strobiliarans are a group of chemicals that inhibit the respiration capacity in fungal pathogens. So at the end of the day, fundamentally, what you're talking about is you're keeping those fungal pathogens from being able to breathe, to take in oxygen, and so they're controlled in that fashion. And then a third and somewhat newer group of fungicides is what are known as the Sdhi compounds. Now, there is a big $50 word that goes with that acronym, Scott. Don't bother pronouncing that on the webinar here today. And the SDHIs share some commonality with the Strobiliarans in that they too arrest the respiration in fungal pathogens. And again, choking off their ability to process oxygen, and so they control the disease in that fashion. We tend to think of both the Strobiliarans and the SDHI compounds as being largely preventive in nature. One of the main things they do is they prevent the germination of fungal spores. So if a fungus is active in a region and spores blow in on your crop, and you've got a good layer of protection already laid down with a timely fungicide application, those Strobiliarans and SDHI compounds help to prevent the germination of those spores so the disease doesn't get a foothold. The other thing about those compounds is the Strobiliarans and SDHIs tend to be longer lived, to have longer residual effectiveness than say the triazoles. And between the two, the SDHIs probably have the longest residual of all, although you could have some debate between different manufacturers as to the length of control you get from one versus the other. But so those are the three primary modes of action or families that we're using, Scott.
Okay, well, I greatly appreciate that information to help narrow down some of the thoughts there at least. But underneath your opinion then, Tim, when's a good time to be doing the application timing in corn and soybeans, let's say?
Well, if you're looking for maximum return on investment, and every grower is, and especially in light of what we talked about at the top of the discussion, the economics surrounding today's farming environment, if we're talking corn, the application timing that's going to drive the greatest overall success, give you best overall efficacy against the spectrum of diseases that are out there, and yield the biggest yield benefit comes from applying those fungicides at the VT to R1 timing, or tassel to early silk emergence on the plant. If we shift over to soybeans for a second, the prevailing thinking is that the optimum window of application, again, to achieve maximum effectiveness against diseases and to derive certain other plant health benefits, would be in the R1 to R3 window. So that's from first bloom in a soybean plant to the early initial stages of pod set on the plant. In my years of experience and having worked with a lot of soybean fungicides and corn fungicides alike, if I talk just for a second about soybeans only, I really consider R3 in soybeans to be the sweet spot. There may be compelling reasons to go earlier than that. Like I said, the R1 to R3 window is considered the general window, but for my money, R3 early pod set is an ideal timing.
Okay, I appreciate that. If a guy only has a certain window to run, when's the best time along that line? And same way too, if he is making a pass, is there any other considerations they should take before making a fungicide application?
Well, since you're going to the effort to put either a ground rig in the case of soybeans most likely, or in the case of tassel stage corn, probably going to be in the majority of cases making that application with a fixed wing aircraft or a helicopter. Since you're going to that effort, it's always good to think about that ahead of time and perhaps go out in those fields and pull some tissue tests and see if there may be things going on nutritionally in the crop that you might be able to address at the same time as you put that fungicide on. In corn, if we're talking about VTR1 corn, a grower or their crop consultant should go out and pull a sample of ear leaves from those plants and send those to a certified laboratory that can give them back a full spectrum tissue analysis that will show what the status is of all the primary, secondary, and micronutrients. And if something is shown to be lacking, then adding that to the tank along with the fungicide is always a good idea. And in some cases, Scott, it may not either, a tissue test might not even show that there's a problem nutritionally, but perhaps the field environment is one in which the yield potential looks to be outstanding, and the grower just wants to make sure that nothing slides off the rails. And so they might want to put a broad spectrum type of micronutrient product on that contains several micronutrients or even some other primary and secondary nutrients, just to touch that crop up, again, to give it that little extra punch. So it's one of those times where it's really the last time you're probably going to go through that field with a piece of equipment and apply anything to the crop. So don't forget or leave out the nutritional aspect.
I appreciate that. Good thoughts there as well. But we talked about the different modes of actions of fungicides. Underneath your opinion, which fungicide is the best choice for my corn and soybean crop, let's say?
Well, there are a lot of choices, and one way to think about the fungicide offerings that are out there is there are kind of like if you want to put it in the analogy of models of cars, you can buy an economy subcompact. It'll get great gas mileage, and it'll get you to work and it'll get you to the grocery store. But it's pretty basic. It doesn't have a lot of extra bells and whistles on it. And, that would be akin to some of the older products like Tilt, which is just simply a standalone triazole, or some of the older Strobiliarans like Headline and Quadris, which are just Strobiliarans. And, I'm not going to say that they can't still be effective in certain times and places, but they really are not the best tools to go to the field with today. If you then move up and say we go up to the mid-range, we talk about the standard family sedan or a basic SUV or crossover vehicle. A little nicer ride, takes you to your destination, a little more style. And in that category are products that are still very effective, products like Headline Amp, which encompasses both a triazole and an SDHI compound. And another example of that would be Quilt Excel, for example, where you have both a triazole and a Strobiliaran. Good products that still offer a lot of efficacy against the broad spectrum of diseases, but they don't necessarily offer the longest residual. They'll give you a solid 14, probably more like 21 days of good control, but then they're going to wane and tail off after that. If you want to move up to the And Scott, I'm dating myself here when I use the Cadillac analogy. Younger people than me may not, speak in terms of Cadillacs as much as I would, but think about the car, whether it's a luxury ride for somebody like a Cadillac, or maybe it's a high performance automobile that really takes those curves nicely. That's where we get into products that encompass three modes of action: triazoles, SDHIs, and the Strobiliarans. And that brings us into newer products like TrivaPro, Miravis Neo, and then also more recently, Revitec and Veltima. Those are the products that are really on the front line. They offer excellent broad spectrum control of nearly all the major diseases that we might potentially face in a corn or soybean crop. Those multiple modes of action also, Scott, bring a proactive element of fungicide resistance or fungal resistance management into play as well. So they give the best control. The fungicides also offer longer residual. Where we used to talk maybe 21 days with some of the older products, with these newer ones that I just mentioned, we can reasonably expect 28, 35 days of residual control. So it's going to carry deeper into the season and provide more late season protection against perhaps late arriving pathogens. So the other thing, like I said, resistance management. We all know as farmers and people who serve farmers, the stories about what's happened in the herbicide arena with a lot of super weeds, herbicide resistant weeds that have cropped up in the last 10 or 15 years. And we're dealing with that. And we're finding that we have to use multiple modes of action and different approaches to be able to control weeds. We're trying to be more proactive on the front end in the fungicide arena and keep that, keep things from sliding off the rails. And so by using a product with multiple modes of action, we're throwing, it's kind of akin to a major league pitcher having a nice arsenal of pitches, to keep that batter off stride. And we're trying to do the same thing with these three mode of action fungicides. We're trying to keep that fungal population off stride. So, we may throw a heater to it on one pitch, and then we throw it a curve, and then a slider and a change up. And it's not a perfect analogy, but I hope that helps people understand. By keeping the pathogen more confused and controlling it better on the front end, but also throwing curves at it, we make it much less likely that any particular pathogens will develop resistance. And we certainly, don't want that to occur, because, it's a very costly process to develop a new fungicide. New fungicide families aren't necessarily being discovered every day of the week. So we need to preserve the effectiveness and the vitality of the products we have. And these three-way products really are, they're the creme de la creme of the fungicide arena. And in my thinking, if you have a good high yield environment, those are the products that you want to probably consider first. If you have maybe more of a middle of the road type yield environment, still a good crop, but maybe it's more in that 150 to 180 bushel corn range, or 50 to 80 bushel beans versus 80 or 100 bushels in beans, or 200, 250, close to 300 bushel potential in corn. That's kind of how you sort out what fungicide you might use. It's based again on what the income potential is there and how much you stand to lose if you don't protect it.
Okay, I appreciate that. Good information as well. But let's kind of change it up and look at the plants themselves. Are there hybrids or varieties that respond more favorably to plant health treatments, or are you dependent on fungicides to help maximize their yield and harvestability?
There's no question about it. And we've done a lot of work here at our research farm in Owensboro, contract work we've done for some of the basic crop protection companies, where we have looked at a platform of genetics and a number of different corn hybrids or soybean varieties, and then compared those with and without fungicides. And what we see every year when we do that type of testing is that there are always some genetic packages that don't show as much response yield-wise to a fungicide, and others may respond tremendously. So that's where it's incumbent upon the grower to know what genetics they've planted and be familiar with their disease packages. There are some corn hybrids, for example, that have outstanding yield potential, but may not have the greatest score when it comes to gray leaf spot resistance. So that example of a hybrid that you definitely want to earmark it and consider it more strongly for a definite fungicide application. On the other hand, you may have a hybrid that just does not that has a great disease package and has not in testing shown as much response to fungicide. However, keep in mind that there can still be good reasons to consider putting fungicides on a corn or soybean plant, even if it hasn't shown a propensity for a large yield response. And Scott, that's where I want to bring in this other aspect of plant health. We know that the first and foremost reason you should ever deploy a fungicide on the acre is because you're trying to control plant disease. But we do know, and this brings us back to the modes of action, we know that the Strobiliaran, a group of fungicides in particular, have some what I have always liked to call extracurricular benefits, in that they affect the plant growth and development in ways that go beyond their disease control. And we know, for example, that some of the Strobiliarans have a positive effect on an enzyme called nitrate reductase. And nitrate reductase is an enzyme that simply helps a plant convert nitrate nitrogen over into ammonium to be able to drive its metabolic processes. And so we improve with some of these Strobiliarans, we actually improve nitrogen utilization efficiency within the plant. So you're getting more value from each pound of applied nitrogen. And again, we're thinking primarily about a corn crop, certainly. It's also known and substantiated that Strobiliarans can, in some cases, help enhance the efficient utilization of CO2 in plants. We know that plants take CO2 in as part of the photosynthetic process. That, along with sunlight and water, is what drives the production of sugars. And so if we help a plant to be more efficient in how it utilizes CO2, that can also redound to yield benefits that have nothing necessarily to do with disease control. And then lastly, the Strobiliarans have also been shown in some cases to enhance water utilization efficiency, to make plants, to help them be a bit more defensive and efficient with water if they come under stress from hot, dry conditions. And I've seen years, Scott, particularly dry years, where farmers went ahead and pulled the trigger on a fungicide application, and because it was dry, the fungal pathogens really didn't show up, because they're primarily driven by more humid conditions where there's plenty of water available. And I've seen good yield responses to fungicides containing Strobiliaran, even in years where plant disease was almost a non-factor. So yes, there are reasons to that go beyond this disease control to consider an application in both corn and soybeans.
That sounds like I didn't realize there was so much more they could do there for you as well. Most people are used to planting the GMO type products. Do we see non-GMO corn and soybeans, or even white corn, respond to plant health treatments as well?
Absolutely, that's a very good question. We don't do here at our research farm a lot of work with white corn or non-GMO corn or other specialty grains, but it's well substantiated out there in the industry that many of those corns, specialty soybeans, natto type beans, tofu type beans, many of them respond at a very good level to fungicides. And in some cases, that's because the field of genetics that is involved in developing some of these specialty grains isn't as big and wide as the genetic focus on the broad acre of some of the traded crops. And because of that, there generally has not been as much focus on developing really outstanding disease packages in some of the specialty or non-GMO crops. And because of that, some of them are just simply more at risk of some of the fungal pathogens, and actually probably need to be considered even more strongly for fungicide protection than many of the GMO type traded crops do.
Okay, well, I appreciate that and everything, but that pretty much covers everything I think we had there on questions, Tim. I do thank you for your time and providing this valuable information today for our farmers across the United States. But any last comments or anything from your side there, Tim? Or
again, I think one simply needs to be proactive and every year there is good information out there about disease development that's taking place in any particular grower's neck of the woods. So, be in tune to information that's provided about the potential development of, and how diseases may be tracking in your area. But the bottom line is, and I have a friend of mine in the business who works for one of the basic crop protection companies, who always reminds growers when she's speaking to them that we can't fix dead. And that is to say that, we can't wait until diseases get a big toehold or a big foothold and then hope to go out and fix the problem. It's one of those things with fungicides, we're generally going to have to make that decision and pull the trigger on the application before we see much happening in the field. So again, I say take, what you think the yield potential of your crop is into consideration. If it's shaking and baking, hitting on all cylinders, and it looks like, you're tracking toward a crop that's going to be as good or better than your 5-year yield average, and there's a considerable amount of yield there to risk, give very strong consideration to a well-timed fungicide application. And again, remember, when you get ready to do that, consider pulling tissue samples, as we talked earlier, and see if there might be anything else that you'd want to add to the tank.
Sounds perfect. I greatly appreciate that. And for all of your listeners out there, if you have any specific questions about your 2020 fungicide programs, please contact your local Nutrien representative or send your questions directly to myself, Scott Locker with the Family Farms Group, and I will direct your questions to the appropriate resource within Nutrien. I can be reached at 618-372-7488, or if you prefer an email, my email is slocker@familyfarmsgroup.com. And once again, I'd like to thank you very much, Tim, for your time today, and also for Nutrien and to assist in providing this information to our farmers.
Thank you, Scott. It's good to be with you.
Thank you, sir.